All right, folks, so since there were so many questions, got a bunch of emails about yield curve inversion. And that's the big story today. And since I promised you when I met you many weeks ago that I'll give you a really current course, that's why I'm doing this. There's going to be an alumni event some evening, so I will include you there too, so you can join me then too. But nevertheless, it may happen, may not happen. So here we are, yield curve inversion. So I'm just going to go through the whole thing with you. So anytime you see long-term interest rates in life, when you're in the corner office on the top floor, at the sea level, always write down the Fisher effect. That's the Fisher effect. This is expected inflation in the future. You all know this. This is the real interest rate. So, if I want to lend $1,000 to Nick here for 5 years. Okay, Nick wants to borrow $1,000 from me for 5 years. I want to be physically better off. This is the real physical. Please understand, all you finance people here, this is a very macro-esque explanation of the inverted yield curve and the bond market. To me, this is the more intuitive one. Because when I read about explanations to the yield curve inversion, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so the financial part's so convoluted. Mean reversion and reversion of mean reversion. No. So, very intuitive. And so I want to be physically better off when Nick pays me back in 5 years. I'm the lender. But I do my ISLM, and I expect inflation to be 15% in the future. So when he pays me back 5 years from now, to 2027, inflation is going to be 15%. So that means when he pays me back, my money is going to be worth less. So I need to factor that in. Because I want, at the end of the day, in 2027, when Nick pays me back, I want to be physically better off by 10%. I want to be able to buy 10% more markers. So I lend him at 25%, the long-term rate. So we all know this. So long-term rates are forward-looking. Long-term rates embody, they incorporate an expectation of future inflation with the expectation from today. I think if there was a way this section could be separately loaded, that would be, thank you very much. So that's a forward-looking thing. There's a forward-looking element, and it's one of the few macro statistics that's forward-looking. Everything we know, most of the things we know and work with are backward-looking. GDP, last month. Inflation rate, last month. Consumer confidence, last month. Last week's. Unemployment, first-time jobless claims, last week's. Backward-looking. Rear view mirror, everything. This is one of the few things that's forward-looking, and it's endogenous. The Feds really cannot control this. The Fed, don't give too much importance to the Fed. Yes, it is important, but it's not omnipotent. You know, they control short-term overnight rates called federal funds rates. Overnight rates only. The forward-looking ones are endogenous, market-driven. So, that's it. Long-term rates. And here is your normal yield curve. So this is the yield curve for treasuries, which is the safest investment on the planet, government bonds. This is time to maturity. So this is 30 days, 1 year, 10 years, let's say 2 years, 10 years, and 30 years. This is ILT, long-term interest rates. And so it's usually upward sloping. Because the greater the duration of the loan, the more the uncertainty, the longer the planning horizon, so it's upward slope. All right. So what we have here is when the long end, let me clear this board here. When the long end starts rising, it means that, clear this board. So generally speaking, the real interest rates more or less constant in our analysis here. So let's put that down. IRT, long-term rates, endogenously determined R plus pi E. This is constant. So therefore, if long-term interest rates increase, it means that pi E is increasing. So the long end starts going up. That means that, so this is as the long end increases, or as ILT increases, this implies that future inflation, pi is inflation, is increasing. So we all know this, we get that. This is ILT, and this is time to maturity. And in class we saw how there were a bunch of scenarios that gave this long end going up. What were some of them? Somebody? Many stories can fill this, give us this final result. When the long end goes up, what could be the scenarios?
Unsustainable deficit.
Could be non-sustainable deficits causing the long end to go up, because that's the implied future inflation is coming. What else could it be?
Economy is expanding.
We can have growth. So stage 2 growth, a Keynesian expansion. And thank you, this is a very Keynesian story. The bond market is largely Keynesian. So growth is coming, and inflation is pro-cyclical in the Keynesian model. So that's the story here. Here is the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. And you can see as P goes up, Y goes up, so growth is coming. What else could it be? What else could be causing this inflation in the future? Cost push inflation, could be an oil shock, Russian invasion of Ukraine, cost push inflation, which is aggregate supply, which is the aggregate supply moving to the left. So here you go P going up and Y going down. So it's counter-cyclical, but again, this will cause all these different scenarios cause the long end to go up. So there's an identification problem, and we'll discuss this. Now let's look at yield curve inversion. So, stage colors. And does that mean a recession is coming? Let me linger over that for a few minutes. So if the yield curve does this number, this is a normal yield curve, then if it does something like this, long end goes down, short end goes up, ILT, time to maturity. This is the scenario that's in the news a lot. Does this mean this is an inverted yield curve? Does this mean an inversion, that recession is coming?
If it's prolonged, right, isn't that typically the indicator? But if it's temporary, it's not.
So a little louder, please.
If it's prolonged, that's a bigger indicator of a recession, but if it temporarily inverts, it's not really anything.
Exactly, that's the big question now. So Nick said if it's a prolonged inversion, maybe a recession is coming. If it's just a wobble, could be a bunch of things. Let's talk about that. So let's look at a prolonged inversion. Where does that come from? How does that work? Here we are. This is the textbook story of yield curve inversion. So this is the typical story is, here's the Keynesian aggregate supply, here's Y maximum at full employment, And this, we kind of talked about this in class. Here's aggregate supply. Here is high inflation. This is P high, let's say 8% inflation. Typically, tell me what the story is about. And this is the big fear in the market right now, that the recession is coming. Fill in the story. What would happen? What is happening here at this diagram when this aggregate demand is hitting the aggregate supply at maximum output and full employment? What's this known as? Oh, overheated economy. Thank you. So this is an overheated economy. SAP bubbles here. SAP bubble is a speculative asset price bubble. Stock market's overheating, housing's overheating, SPACs are overheating, cryptocurrencies overheating. Take your pick. These are bubbles that are going crazy. So what does the Fed do?
Decreases M.
Exactly.
Decreases M.
Decreases M. So here we are. What is that known as? The Fed does what?
Soft landing.
Engineers or tries to engineer a soft landing. Gently brings this baby down. Gently, like, And so decreases M. Fed decreases M and increases interest rates. Which is what happened a few weeks ago. And look at this, folks, what's supposed to happen? So this is, let's put some dates in here. This is YMAX today. And this is Y lower in the future. JD future. On the brakes. We're going to overdo it. We're going to throw us into a recession. We're going to do a hard landing, like all the way back. That's a hard landing. So that's gently. Economy is growing at 6-7%, whatever. 3%. That's a moderate. Why moderate? 3%. But when you do this number, when you bring it down, you're going to create unemployment. You're going to create job loss. You're going to take out the SAP bubbles. You're going to correct the housing market, the stock market. And so today you're in black, and let's mark this in red. You see inflation in the future going down. So this, from here to here, this is decrease in pi E. Is expectations of inflation. Pi E is expectations of inflation with the expectation formed today. So you're looking into the future 6 months from now, and you're going, inflation is going to fall. Taxi J power hitting the brakes. So like I said, this is 2% inflation. Y lower, it's 3%. And today, Y maximum would be 8%, just making up some numbers. And P high would be 8%. So here you are, inflation is lower, and what would happen if pi E is lower? Looking at the Fisher effect. So as pi E falls,
Long-term rates drop.
excellent. Thank you, Nick. ILT is R plus pi E. And so as pi E falls, ILT falls, and hence the long end of the yield curve. So this is greater than equal to, say, 10 years falls. And so this thing here falls as IE falls. ILT fall. So, That's why the long end falls. And this is synonymous with, come on, finish the sentence for me. So this long end falling in terms of the economy, in terms of unemployment, is synonymous with what? What? Yes, with a future slowdown. Recession, if it goes wrong, it's too slow. And impending, finish the sentence for me. Something else is worrying people when it slows down.
Unemployment.
Unemployment. Thank you, Nikhil. Unemployment.
So
Why did the short end go up? Sorry, Zahim. Just hang on. Why did the short end go up, Dan? Let me hear.
Oh, no, I have it.
Why is the short end going up?
because
Inflation expectations.
Yeah. Short end, remember, is overnight. Very short. Why is the short end going up?
the overnight rates are increasing.
Yes, that's what the Fed did. So that's what the Fed. So this short end increases due to Fed's soft landing attempt. Fed can only control very short term, overnight really. So rates. So that's how the short end goes up, long end comes down. The aggregate demand, is slowing the economy down. So this is the textbook story that when you have a yield curve inversion, a slowdown is coming. So this is the nice clean story, and I'm going to tell you what does the American economy look like now. It's not nearly as unequivocal as this discussion. So I think you had a question.
The question is regarding the intervention itself. So every time you intervene with the economy because of whatever event, it eventually I kind of argue that it's only affect the short time. I would say that it does impact the long term, and expecting more and more intervention in events in the future, I could even look at it and say, oh, it's going to fall in 10 years, or it's going to rise. What's the meaning of that?
So you talk about, so Zahi's comment here was by intervention of you mean the Federal Reserve changing M?
Because of whatever happened in the economy at that point in time, or
Wow.
future point in time.
Thank you. So his question for those of you watching online is this really effective? Can the Fed actually engineer a soft landing? And we will see that there is a bunch of economists who don't even believe in this diagram here, who say it's a supply side, it's a vertical aggregate supply. Milton Friedman said, stop doing all this. Stop increasing M, decreasing M. Stop increasing M to jumpstart, is what he taught us. Stop decreasing M to soft land. Just leave it alone. Let it grow at X%. So that's coming in the next class. But these are people who believe that role of M should not be to manage the economy.
I have a couple of questions. So one is, you had stated that 30-year mortgage rate, those rates are going up, and that's probably synonym of, that's a true reflection of where the economy is
So
going.
his comment was the 30-year mortgage rates are going up. They're now like around 5% from what I heard from someone today. And what's with that? Why is that market seems to be divorced from the treasury market? So, great point. Let's see what's actually happening. This is the theory. Everybody okay with the clean theory? Yes, no? Short end going up because that's the button the Fed's pressed, pushing overnight rates up. Long end going down because you're looking today, you're here today, looking in the future. Inflation rates going down, things are slower, you get this inversion. First of all, sometimes the government, the Feds mess with the long end in the treasury market. It's called Operation Twist. It was done in COVID, it was done in the subprime crisis. They artificially bring the long end down to try and calm the economy, because when the long end goes up, everyone panics. So they artificially manage it, but we're not talking about that now. Let's see why in the treasury market we're having some sort of a long end going down. Mortgage market, we are not. The answer is hot capital inflow into treasuries. The rest of the world is parking its money in our government bonds. That's what's affecting the treasury long-term rates. So let me show you what's actually happening in our story. So the reality now. So I haven't seen the yield curve last couple of days. But our yield curve kind of looks like this. For a long time, American yield curve looked like that, something like that. Maybe 5 years. And recently, this is IoT. Recently, we've been seeing the shorter end here doing this number and the longer end kind of coming down. So we're seeing inversion for half of it, and for the short end here, we are seeing it going up. You with me so far? So what you have here is Jay Powell is saying this is the main thing. The short end from 0 to 5, 0 to 2. Jay Powell, the Fed chairperson, is saying, I'm looking at this. And I'm seeing inflation coming. The long end to me is going up. He's saying that this story, he's not really saying that, but this is my analysis. This story here is confusing because I really don't think the long end is dropping because a recession is feared. I think it's massive hot capital inflow coming into our country. So if you were to click on this and supersize it, this would look like supply of loanable funds, demand for loanable funds. So I is 0, and this is greater than 5 years, long-term bonds. And what you are seeing is massive hot capital inflow coming in here from countries that don't like us. This is always the case. In the OPEC crisis in 74, Yom Kippur in 79, when the Arab countries were boycotting us and not sending oil, where do you think they parked their money? Here. They were, done this, it was called the petrodollar inflow, follow the money. They were jumping up and down, burning the American flag, jumping up and down, burning the American flag, and then, excuse me, hold the flag here, I'm going to move some money into America. I'll be back. Okay, done. Give me the flag. Oh, white Satan, jumping up and down, burning the flag. It came here. In fact, it hardly even left. So money is coming in from Russia, from China. From China, there's been a massive hot capital exodus for the last 3, 4, 5 years. Not just hot capital, but high-skilled labor. When your high-skilled labor leaves, when your capital leaves, you have an issue. And Putin is managing the ruble, artificially trying to make it stronger. Of course, if you can artificially manage any currency to be stronger. The real strength of a currency is what happens when you stop artificially managing it. Endogenously, what happens? It maybe is gonna fall, it's gonna sink like a stone. So you have people in my WhatsApp group going, oh look, the ruble's gone now, going, yeah. I can make this pen cost $100 by buying and selling the supply of these pens in the market. But the moment I stop intervening in that market, this pen's going to be $1.12 or whatever the price is. So wait and see. And so what you have here is this massive hot capital inflow. Is a monster flight to safety, which is affecting our long end. That is causing huge capital inflow, which is great, we kind of need it, and consequently, finish the sentence for me. consequently pushing down, thank you, long-term interest rates on treasuries. And we told this is not happening to the mortgage market to this extent. It's coming into treasuries. It's still, in spite of all our problems in our country, people get really bored and annoyed when I keep saying this. The US Treasury is still the safest investment on the planet. It's the risk-free rate from your capital asset pricing model. The RF in your capital model, that is this Treasury rate. So that's the long end.
But when the hot capital come in, why does it just affect the long end?
Because the hot capital is coming in long bonds.
Oh, it's coming in long.
It's coming in long bonds. You know, you're parking your money here. Hot capital is coming in and high skilled labor is coming in, and we need to grab it while we can. So many of my executive MBA students who I taught in Beijing, Shanghai, Eric, they are not there anymore. They are like you guys, they're out. They went to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong, they're in Bali, they're in New Zealand, more and more and more every day. So I'm going, how come you can get my WhatsApp? And they're going, oh, because we're not in Beijing or Shanghai anymore. We're now in Wellington. We're in Sydney.
So maybe are they investing that money which is coming in real estate, and that's why the rates are going up?
All kinds of things. Just parking in treasuries or real estate. Right now, probably not real estate, just treasuries. So here you are. So you have Jay Powell is looking at this end and saying, I'm focusing on this because this is not adulterated by, if you want to use that word, affected, I should say, by massive hot capital inflows. And I'm going to act like inflation is coming, and I'm going to sit on the brakes. And he's a textbook guy. You know, we talked about him, you know. There is no identification. You click on him, there is no identification of anything. Cost push. Most of our inflation now is cost push inflation, thanks to Putin. You know, I don't want us to hit the brakes 6 times because it's cost push inflation. You know? So, for demand pull, yes. This is why when we measure inflation, we have something called core inflation, where we subtract out oil. We subtract out exogenous shocks, cost push. And then we see which inflation is demand pull, because that's the kind of inflation the Fed can slow down. Fed can do a darn thing for cost push inflation. So Jay Powell needs to look at the core inflation rate, subtract out the oil influence, and calm down a bit. So
does that mean the recession is not coming?
Well, remember, end of this year, we'll see a fiscal stimulus, so we'll have G going up. Hopefully this war will end, so the oil prices will come down, hopefully. So the cost push inflation will go down and Jay Powell will stop hitting the brakes. But I'm just pointing out that this is what you're seeing in the yield curve. I don't have control over the exogenous shocks. So he's looking at this. This is what your yield curve is looking at. This is where the whole inversion story is coming from. But it's not inverting in the normal sense. You know, the short end is going in one direction, the long end is inverting. I've never seen this before, by the way. Normally the inversion is like, and this is new.
So does that mean stock markets for all developing countries are going to probably fall in the near future with hot capital going up?
Yeah, stock markets are going to be hammered. The carry trades have been coming home. But we all knew this was coming, right? So all these countries, India, Brazil, Argentina, they've already baked this in. This was coming for a long time, so it's not come as a surprise. Sri Lanka is melting down. We saw that. Sorry. Yeah.
To this point, so.
In Bangladesh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
To this point, that you won't really know if it's a soft landing or if it's capital inflow, or is it both, or maybe it's a
It could be both, you know, you're right. It could be both. It could absolutely be both. And that's what we mean by the identification problem, you know. You see the price of, my market going from $1.15 to $5. Does this mean that there was a big demand for this market? or does it mean that the supply chain is torn to pieces? There's a decrease in supply. Which one is it? All I can say is it's $5 now. All Jay Powell can say is inflation is 8% now. Which one is it? Could be both. Probably is both. So very complex, very complicated. It's by no means clear, Victoria. It's no means clear.
So is there a way they measure how much hot capital is coming?
No,
with
it's
this?
very impossible. Hot capital, when it decides to come into your country, question was how do you measure hot capital? You can have proxies, how much money is going into treasuries, but it can go into housing, it can go in the underground economy, it can be going into a suitcase where you start a SPAC. Anyway, that's my little overview on the yield curve inversion. Nick, thank you for recording. So we're gonna stop now, and I'm going to go into chapter 10, supply side model.